With nearly 12,000 tools available, selecting the right MarTech can be challenging. Meet the MarTech Intelligence Reports, free buyer's guides exploring specific platforms, including purchase considerations, leading players, adoption trends, and more. No matter where you are in the purchase journey, MarTech Intelligence Reports can help.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Navigating the Chaos of Consent, Compliance, and Customer Trust in an AI World. I am Alyssa Reeve. I'm the co-founder of Agile Marketing Alliance and founder of HyperAdaptive.Solutions, and I will be your moderator for today's discussion. I am so excited to be joined by this group of individuals. I will give them just a second to introduce who they are and who they're with. Anthony, kick us off.
Hi, I'm Anthony Coppage, and I have been working with enterprise clients all the way down to some of the SMBs in the SaaS space, specifically around technology and fintech for a while. And I started applying my knowledge around AI because I saw what was possible with ChatGPT, and it stoked an entire career of like pivoting and changing. It was awesome.
And we're also joined by Alex.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Alex Cash. I'm Director of Strategy at OneTrust for our consent-based solutions. OneTrust is the market-leading provider for consent management and privacy automation solutions, and more recently, AI governance tools as well.
Thanks for that. Adam.
Yeah, and I'm Adam Eisler, legal counsel at the IAB, the Digital Advertising Industry Org, and I lead our AI Insights Working Group, which seeks to bring in a big tent of publishers, ad tech players, lawyers, to address the legal changes in the AI space.
I mean, 3 powerful perspectives from amazing individuals. Just a quick housekeeping item. If you have questions or comments during the session, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And we'll do our best to bring them into the conversation. And we do have a dedicated time at the end of our 30 minutes to start to address your questions. So feel free to ask those. So to get us started, I'd like to do a quick round, a rapid fire for all of our panelists. And in one sentence, and we're going to start with you, Alex, in one sentence, describe the biggest shift in the data landscape that marketers must adapt to right now.
There's one big obvious answer, but I'm going to actually pivot slightly and take a different track. This is very much a sort of developing concept, but with the introduction of mobile, the way that we interacted with technology and with brands completely changed. We went from browser-based to app-based, and now a huge amount of traffic is through mobile. And the way that these AI products operate today and their ability to interact with voice, wearable devices, etc., I think that there is a very real possibility that in the future we talk about AI sort of agents and platforms outside of the context of the browser and the mobile app, with a much more directly connected user to a brand, and with that, all of the sort of challenges and opportunities that comes with it.
Love that. Adam, what's your take?
My take is, I can give the answer, we're moving from a heavily third-party data reliant ecosystem to an ecosystem based on consent. But I think in the AI context, I heard a quote recently from my friend Firas Ahmed at People Inc., who said in the AI space, it's not just how companies use AI, it's also how AI uses those companies. And so it's this emerging two-way street where you're not just putting checks and balances in place to protect your company's IP and confidential information from AI. It's also, if you're like a publisher, looking under the hood and checking, well, how are these AI developers using our content?
Yeah, so fascinating. Anthony, I know you've spent a career in data. What's your take on this?
I think the quote is helpful, but I would add a third. So the customers know what AI is doing, or want to know what AI is doing, and what is AI doing with the customers' data. So it's not just what is happening with the company. Like I love that quote, but there's a whole context here, right? There's the company, there's AI, and there's the consumer, the user. And what we want to be careful of is not hiding what we're doing. When we be very transparent about it. I think that AI governance, instead of the perception that we hide, I think transparency isn't just legal protection. I think when you become transparent and show them the way their data is used, and you leverage AI to help do that, of what it captures and the way it's presented, that would actually, I think, boost engagement. And I think that, and there's some data, because a Pew Research study that I found said that 82% of consumers are more likely to trust brands when the data use is explained clearly, not behind a legal paywall of almost like a jargon wall, or the terms and conditions that everybody just clicks agree to and never reads. So I think it's a real onus on us to be very clear about the way and the why that we're using it, and then show them that.
Yeah, I love that. Transparency equals trust. And I'm going to ask and answer my own question, which is I see a real shift around the democratization of data for marketers, because so often we've had to rely on others for the process, the collection, the processing, the analysis of data. And I feel like AI is going to change that for marketers. And so for everybody listening, I think start thinking about that too. How can you be using data in ways that you haven't been able to before? So Anthony, we talked a little bit about traditional governance, and we know that those types of policies get updated annually at best, right? And with AI tools evolving weekly, how do we start to create governance that's both protective and agile? And do you have an example of what that could look like in practice?
Mm-hmm. I do actually. So I'll start maybe with the example, and then I'll go from there. There was a study that I found where they were trying to figure out, how do people think about and leverage when their AI is used in data, or what does it mean? And so they did this study, and I thought it was interesting because they were thinking about how to empower users, not how to tell the users what's happening. So it was a very interesting distinction. So instead of the typical of why it works the way it always did, I think there's a really interesting shift here. So to me, that's important. But one of the things that comes from that is they did this study and they said, what we were trying to understand is what is the way people feel about something, not what do they understand about something. And the perception is reality thing came into it. So instead of in the past where we would say, we have all of our terms and conditions, we have all our governance, here's how your data is used, long legal explanation, click here. Now we're saying, we leverage your data with your consent and collaboration so that you're helping us not only train the AI, but you're helping us show you how we're using your data. And I thought that was a very inventive step. So think about that from a marketing perspective. And now when you're building your campaigns and you're asking for information, you're not just saying, trust us, we'll be good with your data. You're going to say, here's a way you can understand how your data is used. And it's, in this case, a dashboard where they can log in and see how their data is used inside that tool or in that app. And I thought that was a great way to do it when you have owned data. A little more different when it's not owned data and you're doing it on just a website, for example. But it is a step in the right direction, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that you're beating the drum of this notion of transparency, and not only saying how important it is, but also really providing some concrete examples of how it could be done. So thanks for that.
Welcome.
Adam, so you've noted that there's no real industry standard yet for AI governance, right? It's fast, it's evolving. So given that laws don't exist yet for AI, should companies be creating policies based on existing privacy principles or wait for those regulations to take hold?
Definitely don't wait. I don't think, we learned the industry learned some lessons post GDPR and then also post CCPA. We're waiting. In the end, put a lot of companies that chose to wait at a disadvantage, because the companies that kind of like looked to the GDPR for guidance or looked for companies that were maybe taking a more privacy proactive approach, they were in a position to kind of hit the ground running, and then the others sort of lagged behind, and some are even still lagging behind and let's say getting caught up in regulatory enforcement actions that are around old data privacy principles like privacy disclosure. But I do just want to clarify something. So there's no industry-wide consensus on how to run a legal governance program, in the sense that there might be something similar that other privacy industry orgs have put out, these sort of guidebooks. We at the IAB put out this IAB governance and risk management playbook, and it was a distillation of many conversations with many, many different players, some extremely large, some medium, not really any small parties. But there are a few things that we can all agree on. The first thing is there is no AI carve-out in existing state comprehensive privacy laws. Meaning there's nowhere it says, in the event of AI doesn't apply, right? Like there are concepts like automated decision making or profiling that, in my opinion, give sort of a wink to AI. This might be a good time to remind the audience that AI has been used in programmatic advertising for decades at this point. It's really, it's the technical backbone of real-time bidding. And so the digital advertising industry, this shouldn't really, like, this isn't new to us. We've been using algorithmic processing to facilitate real-time bidding for decades. And so because there's no existing AI carve-out, we can actually, there are some places that we can look to figure out how to write certain addendums to our existing acceptable use policies or data use policies, et cetera. And I just want to remind the listener of a few points. One, all states except Utah and Iowa grant the right to opt out of profiling. So that's on your internal compliance teams to look, what does profiling mean? And to look at your organization's data processing practices and decide if profiling is implicated, or if it's not, how close are you getting? And then you can start designing guardrails for your governance program around that. All states include the right to opt out of targeted advertising, which means if you're using any sort of LLM-based tool for that profiling, whether it be an audience segmentation or hyper-personalized ad creative, you might want to check through your existing governance program, et cetera, whether it's actually possible to opt out. Like, once it's in there, can you actually remove it without model disgorgement? All states include the right to opt out of sale, and that obviously has a very expansive definition of what sale is. Most states include specific due diligence requirements. So there's a little bit of guidance on how to conduct due diligence in this context. And then all states require consent to process sensitive personal information. And we know in the last 2 years that even SPI has begun to sort of envelop data elements that not everyone has consensus on as sensitive. So yes, there's no framework, but we do have some signposts that we can use to chart the way. Everyone should have a privacy program at this point. Add a few questions, do things like red team, take a crawl, walk, run approach. First just do crawl, then walk, then run. And by the time we might get some kind of federal AI legal framework, you should be in a decent place already. Or if a regulator comes knocking, you should be able to lift up some documentation and show, oh yeah, we've been thinking about this. We've been thinking about discrimination and profiling and automated decision making. Don't wait.
Yeah, I love it. And I love this notion that we don't have to start with a blank page, that we have some foundations to go from. And it's interesting. Our next step is to take a poll. And I want to set up this poll with some framing based on what you said. So everybody in the audience, you'll be asked to join this poll. So please enter your first name and click on that join button for the poll. And then click the polls icon in the right corner of the video window. and you'll see the poll come up, and then I see it on my screen, and select an option. So this says, does your company have a governance policy that addresses AI use or automation? And what we just heard is that there's no standard. And so I'm really interested if you feel that you have a governance policy that addresses AI. So you are interacting AI potentially in new ways, potentially in ways that you've done for many, many years. And yes, we have that, and it's clear. No, I don't think we do. Or if we do, I don't know about it. Sort of, which is like, yeah, maybe we had the policy from before, but we don't have the policy now. Or I don't even have any idea. So I'll give you just a second to make a selection. And again, if you are just tuning in, maybe, we're all multitasking in this world. So you're going to enter your name and click on the Join Audience button. Click on that polls icon in the top right corner of the video, and then make your selection. So we've got some moderators behind the scene who are quickly tabulating. They might be using AI. Let's see the results here. Look at that. Wow. So it's about evenly split. And Adam, I just want to toss this back to you for a second. What's your reaction to these poll results?
So quick clarification. When I said all states, I meant all states with comprehensive privacy laws. So not all states have these laws. In my previous, just want to be totally clear. So that's 20 states, including California and Texas. The poll results. I'm combining sort of and yes. So 65%. That's not bad. I'm putting aside the I have no idea. About a quarter not having a governance policy that addresses AI use or automation. I'm curious, is your company using AI in some way? Because if not, okay, no big deal. But if it is, I'd be very interested to know if that's like a work in progress, or we're just not going to do it at all. But not terribly surprising results.
It's
a bell curve, right?
And I would say, anybody that scored poorly, right? You're not in threat today is my thing. Like their intention he's talking about is what's important. Are you intending to protect and be future focused versus saying, we've got it all in place or we're screwed. Like, so don't panic.
Right.
Yeah, definitely don't panic.
Don't panic yet. So Alex, I want to hear from you. So given this regulatory vacuum that Adam described, how do we use data and AI responsibly while still remaining competitive? And I'd love it if you had specific examples of companies that you feel are getting this balance right.
Absolutely. So the first thing I want to say is I completely agree with everything that Adam said. And I think I'm going to sort of frame this up in a slightly different way, but that agrees with him. Yes, it is true that we don't have a comprehensive AI governance law in the US at the federal level, but we do have in many places comprehensive privacy laws. And for a marketing audience, most of our AI applications are going to be dealing with processing using customer data, which is governed by privacy laws. So you already have a really robust series of requirements. The other thing to think about when you're kind of making use of these privacy requirements to build out your program is that consistently around the world, in almost all privacy law, you have this concept of purpose, which is, why are you doing this business process? What is the reason behind it? When we talk about consent, we talk about capturing consent for a purpose. An example could be email marketing, right? I'm not consenting to an email automation platform. I'm consenting to a business using my email address to send me marketing via any collection of tools that they use. The important thing there is that those tools that we're using are going to be typically provided by third parties. And so there's going to be some need for disclosure around data sharing, data transfers, and the use of these products. But I'm not consenting to the product itself, I'm consenting to the process. And that concept applies as well when we think about AI applications, because there is a big difference between using a product that has a native LLM baked into its capabilities versus training a model in-house. If I'm taking a base model from OpenAI and training it in my business, that's an R&D activity. I'm not necessarily always using these models to train and improve over time based on my customer data as a business. So the point I'm making here is that it's really important to distinguish what are the products that I'm using, what are the AI capabilities, and in which mode am I using them? Are they being used to infer things, to make probabilistic decisions, or am I actually training something that is specific to me and my business? And what are the appropriate controls that I need to put in place around that? Because it's a very different conversation. There is a pretty significant philosophical debate in the privacy community today as to whether consent can actually be used at all to train privacy models. One of the key concepts of consent is that you need to be able to withdraw it, and it needs to be meaningful. Well, if you train a model on someone's data and then they withdraw their consent, what do I do? Do I roll back the model? And consent needs to be able to be withdrawn at any point. So it kind of doesn't really work in the context of model training. And we like to use this expression, you can't unbake a cake, right? That's a perfect example of where that applies. And we have heard comments from regulators in Europe and in the US that consent is probably not suitable for model training and model development. Instead, you may want to rely on some other legal protection or agreement. Now, one other thing I'll just touch on what Adam said earlier around this idea of automated decision making applies in some places in the US. Consumers can opt out of processes where automated decision making is taking place. In the entirety of Europe, the GDPR is very explicit that users can opt out of certain types of automated decision making. It doesn't specify whether it's an LLM or a homegrown algorithm, but you need to account for the fact that if you have a product that is making decisions that are meaningful, so the example that's often used is decisions in finance where we're approving or rejecting a mortgage, for example, based on data that we have, that's automated decision making. And consumers have the ability to say, I want a human in the loop to make that decision or to oversee that decision. So all of these things come together to say, we don't have comprehensive rules, but we do have a combination of laws and frameworks and policies that we can apply to build something that's really robust. Now, where we see customers get this right, as I mentioned at the top, like we're a privacy company, but we've more recently introduced a number of AI governance capabilities. What we saw over the past 7 years since GDPR came into effect was that marketing teams increasingly owned responsibilities that were originally part of the privacy team. Mm-hmm. Marketing teams own data acquisition, consent. They own the integration of consent, the propagation of these signals to different systems. And so as we move into this new world where we've got each department making use of these products in different ways, marketing needs to be at the same table with privacy and with our governance and risk teams to make sure that they have an appropriate level of ownership. We like to use this expression of govern well, move fast, which is to say, you probably have to slow down a little bit at the beginning to do all of those basics that Adam was talking about of understanding the processes that allows us to put the controls in place to ensure that the data that we have today and the data that we're collecting tomorrow is protected in a way that allows us to innovate based off that data rather than having to turn around in 6 months and say, okay, we missed something. We've got to get rid of this data, revert this model, etc.
Yeah, Alex, you just did a wonderful job shining the spotlight on the complexity that is our current landscape. And I really appreciate your teasing apart this monolith that we call AI and helping us see that it's really made up of parts and pieces, and we can't unbake the cake. And in fact, I feel like with AI, we're putting more and more cakes out there. And can we even think through all the intended and unintended consequences of the actions that we're taking. I don't have any answers. I don't know that you have the answers, but you sure raised some really interesting points. The time is going incredibly fast with all of your insights. I think we have time for one more lightning round, and let's look to the future. So, Adam, let's start with you. And in the next 18 months, what change in either data ownership or consent models or AI governance do you think will most disrupt current marketing practices? And I'd love for you to keep it practical. What should marketers start preparing for now?
That's a tough one. 18 months in legal land or in regulatory land is not a long time. In my mind, the biggest question that marketers will probably need to start thinking about with their legal teams and with their leadership are questions around fair use and IP. And I know this is mostly a publisher question, and so like apologies if it's not as relevant. But publishers will start to need, it'll become increasingly important to find that sweet spot between like a licensing deal here, a technical solution to stop unauthorized bot crawling here. I think there's this emerging discussion, and I'm gonna get technical, and I hope I don't lose people, so I'll try to like do a quick parentheses. This is what this means. There's this emerging discussion around fair use in LLM training. So that's the fair use doctrine under the Copyright Act that says certain limited use cases certain limited use cases of copyright infringement are actually fair use. They're not copyright infringement. And this idea of is RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, where the LLM model goes and seeks real-time information on the web in order to give you an up-to-date answer, and whether that's fair use. So I think these kinds of questions are going to fundamentally alter the actual product that your marketing team uses, because it may be that certain aspects of the product can no longer be offered either because of some legal decision. But I don't think that will happen in 18 months. I think in 18 months, I think by the end of 18 months, your marketing teams should have a handle of what your AI use cases are, whether they're even necessary, meaning have you seen an actual ROI, or is this just everyone sort of succumbing to hype? If not, maybe consider removing it from your ad tech stack. Like find the areas that are actually really useful, that actually really increase ROI, like something like workflow automation, and maybe start asking whether just like onboarding all these different AI tools with the assumption that they're really going to help your a given ad campaign, and then realizing that like in the end it wasn't really that helpful. We still needed a human in the loop for most of the time. I feel like that was a non-answer, but I hope there's some useful stuff in that non-answer.
Well, I saw
18 months is not long.
Yeah, so pay attention to the law. It's changing. Anthony, I'm going to toss it over to you next. But before I do, I'd like just to remind all of the listeners that Q&A is coming up next. So please take a moment to drop your questions into either the chat or the Q&A button, if you have the Q&A button. And Anthony, what do you see happening in the next 18 months?
Well, my crystal ball's never worked, but I'm going to try. So you know how it used to say in marketing, before agile marketing, was be a T-shaped marketer, be really good and deep in one area and kind of wide and narrow in the rest. And I think with agile marketing and the ability for teams to have cross-functional working relationships, we started to see what we call V-shaped marketers. They're deep in a couple of areas, but still have a broad overview. I think that tomorrow's marketer needs to be part data scientist, part ethicist, and part storyteller. So in the next 18 months, marketing leaders will need to blend three skill sets: fluency in AI-driven tools that relate specifically to marketing and the way you acquire and mine and leverage data. Fluency in understanding the implications of the ethical and legal frameworks, but not to become a legal expert, right? You just need to understand what's the implication, and you get to really deeply understand that. And then fluency and you should already have this, human-centered storytelling. because ultimately stories are what people gravitate to. The marketer of the near-term future won't just push campaigns, and I'm more content marketing than ad tech, but they will orchestrate ecosystems of trust and personalization. And I see that as a hybrid role that requires comfort with both the machine logic and the human emotion. But those are the three things I see, Melissa.
I appreciate that. And there was a nice little soundbite in there that I loved, and I'm gonna capture. I can't repeat it back to you, but thanks for articulating that so well. Alex, what do you see happening in the next 18 months?
I've just got two points. So I touched on it already, but marketing, every department, but marketing especially, will have to own significant parts of the governance program. Anyone who's worked at a big enough company has heard the phrase, we all are responsible for security. Well, we're all responsible for governance, but it's just how we position it to our colleagues that can help get some of that buy-in. As you know, as Anthony was saying earlier, more of an enabler than a blocker. But marketing teams must be at the table. Otherwise, you're going to be scrambling to review the data that you're already using and realize, oh, we've been doing something we shouldn't here. The second thing, to sort of come back to what I said right at the beginning of the webinar about these changes perhaps in the interfaces that we use and the platforms that we use, there have been some developments recently on this concept of agents where you are giving an AI a task, an instruction, and it can go away and autonomously do that. And one of the paradigms that's emerging is this idea of A to A, agent to agent, where a consumer or a business could instruct an agent to go perform some task on its behalf. And this introduces a whole new idea of like how systems and communities and businesses, talk to each other. And it's going to have potentially a really big impact on the marketing data that marketers are able to acquire. And so there may be this future scenario where we need to consider how do we manage tracking and data acquisition and consent for consumers, but also agents that act on their behalf, and how do we relate those two kind of entities to one another? I don't know how it's going to shake out, but it's certainly interesting to think about as we talk about kind of the quality of the data that we're using to make decisions and go to market.
Great, thanks for that, Alex. So I'm going to switch this over. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. And so I think this is what you were just touching on, Alex, and feel free to pop back in. But the question is, what about consent and compliance in an agentic world where agents do things autonomously and interact with other agents, potentially from other organizations? And is there anything you wanted to add to what you just articulated?
Yeah. So when we say consent, we're talking about a legal concept most of the time. But those legal concepts are governed under privacy laws that relate to humans. Consent is a concept that also exists outside of the scope of privacy regulation. And so perhaps there is, a parallel but fundamentally different way to think about it when we're talking about consent from an agent. The way that we're exploring this is there are cases where, let's say I'm going to make a purchase via an agent. I say, I want a particular pair of shoes, go find me a good deal. Well, an agent could go out and look at a variety of retailers, but it's in my interest to allow that agent to tell those retailers certain things about me. Maybe I'm a member of the loyalty program, or maybe I need to disclose where I am because I have like a regional offer or promotion or something. And so you come to this scenario where I, as a consumer, may give an agent certain data about me, and I say, I give you permission to share this on my behalf. And so it's not necessarily the same concept when we think about consent from a legal perspective, but it is in the kind of the broader concept of sharing data with permission.
Yeah. Thanks for taking on that question. It's a challenge. So Adam, we do have a question about the playbook. Of course, you showed it to the folks, and folks are wanting it. How can they access that document?
I think we'll circulate the link afterward in some of our follow-up communications. Otherwise, you can go to IAB.com and search AI Governance and Risk Management Playbook, very creative title. And
I just got a
yeah,
note from the organizers that they can add it to the console. So for attendees,
nice.
search your console. And then I do have a follow-up question for you, Adam, which is one of the questions is, what are your thoughts on AI-based note-taking for meetings or creating instructions for a process? A lot of companies are offering this service, but they use your recordings to train AI.
Yep. So we do not at the IAB. We have outright prohibited that. We find that in many contexts, look, it's going to be fact sensitive, right? Like you may be discussing sensitive things in your meetings. I'm sure plenty teams discuss sensitive things in meetings, and you don't want an AI note taker. I understand that it helps. We have elected to forego that convenience. And instead encouraged free and open communication. And I prefer that personally. I'm not that down with AI note takers, even though it makes it easy. And it's just because I find it adds a whole nother element of, I don't want to use the word surveillance, but like who's using it. And this is very specific to like the industry org context, but we've outright prohibited. I think there's a whole host of concerns around document production in the event that you're sued. It's again, I get it. It's convenient. It's certainly can and should be a risk-based, fact-sensitive consideration. What kind of stuff are you talking about? What meetings is it allowed? There's probably no issue for having an AI note taker in a setting like this, where we're all sort of talking openly and no one's sharing any confidential information. But I would encourage compliance professionals to take a good look, submit a poll to all the different departments, ask what kind of meetings you want to use these AI note takers in, or just outright prohibit them. That is a totally fact-sensitive calculus.
Yeah, fair enough. So, Anthony, we only have a couple of minutes left, but I do want to throw this last question your way, which is, which internal group should be in charge of AI governance?
Thanks. The hardest question of the day. The answer is the group is probably a conglomeration of people. I don't think it's a business unit that owns it, in my opinion, because as the other gentlemen have pointed out, what marketing's doing used to be done in terms of some of the privacy used to be handled entirely by legal, for example, or maybe IT. So you've got to say who should have access and help us have a narrative around how we're going to do this and set some governance policies, but also have the ability to understand the use cases. And should we have a never except for situation or only if situation? And you can't do that in the vacuum of marketing. So you're going to want to have I think a group effort, an aggregation of the people who have a valuable stake in that, speaking to it together. I don't think it's a group like a business unit just by default owns it anymore. I think it's too dynamic for that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you used the word dynamic, because I'm a big proponent of dynamic governance. And how I start to explain it is we've got to move from static to dynamic. And how that starts to look is exactly as you said, a cross-functional group at the top who's setting general direction, general guardrails for your usage. And then you probably need another layer, and depending on how you're organized, value streams or functional area, to do a double click into that. And then I've got, whether it's your AI leads or your champions, a group on the front line where people can ask questions to those individuals, say, hey, I'm about to record this meeting, or I want to upload this type of data. Is this allowed? And I think all of that is supported by some sort of AI-driven internal reg system where people can query it and say, hey, what's the rule du jour? Because it is dynamic, it is changing. What a wonderful discussion. Thank you to each and every panelist. That was a powerful use of time. I'd invite everybody who's watching to take a moment to rate this session. And if you're queuing up for the next session, click the red button in the Dig Deeper tab. And the next session is how AI and data activation deliver unforgettable customer experiences. Thank you so much.
Join the MarTech Conference November 4th for one powerful day of real-world strategies and live expert insights. Scan the QR code on screen to register now for free.